What if the interview that was never meant to happen changed everything? He was a single dad out of chances and out of time until a stranger said three simple words that stopped him in his tracks. Don't go. He thought it was just a mistake. She knew it was something else entirely. This isn't just a story about second chances. It's about the kind of quiet kindness that builds something stronger than success. It builds home. So before we begin, if you're someone who believes in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that the smallest moments can carry the biggest weight, hit that subscribe button and stay with us through every twist, every tear, and every turn of this unforgettable journey. Now, let me tell you what happened when he almost walked away. Single dad was about to leave the interview, but she reached for his hand and said, "Don't go." The rain had thinned by the time Ethan Cole stepped under the office awning, but his shirt clung to his back like a second skin, and the cuffs of his pants were soaked from the puddles he hadn't managed to avoid. He checked his watch, 9:53 a.m. He was 23 minutes early for a job interview. He wasn't even sure he believed in anymore. The reception area of Brennan architecture was polished and quiet, its modern lines softened by warm lighting and walls lined with minimalist watercolor prints. Ethan hesitated at the glass door before pushing it open, his hand briefly catching on the rusted metal edge of his umbrella. The contrast between the building and himself was not lost on him. This place spoke in whispers of refinement and possibility. He meanwhile carried his resume in a plastic grocery bag to keep it from getting wet. Behind the front desk, a young woman in a navy blazer looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. May I help you?" Ethan cleared his throat. "I'm here for the 10:15 interview. Ethan Cole." She tapped her keyboard, brows furrowing slightly. One moment. He waited, shifting on his heels. His hand smelled faintly of engine grease no matter how hard he'd scrubbed. The paper bag crinkled as he held it tighter, the resume inside slightly bent at one corner. He hated that. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," the receptionist said finally, her tone soft but uncertain. "You're not on the schedule. Are you sure it was today?" Ethan offered a half smile he hoped didn't show how hollow he felt. "It's all right. There might have been a mix-up." He glanced back at the rain beyond the door, already calculating the bus schedule. "Thanks anyway." As he turned, the receptionist opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. He didn't wait. He'd learned over the years that dragging out disappointment only gave it more power. His boots echoed on the tiled floor as he walked away, each step heavier than the last. He was already halfway to the door when a woman's voice, clear and low and unmistakably firm, called out behind him. "Ethan Cole." He stopped. Slowly, cautiously, he turned around. A woman stood in the hallway beyond the reception desk holding a slim leather folder in one hand, the other resting on the doorframe, like she wasn't sure whether to enter or retreat. She was dressed simply, a fitted blouse, charcoal slacks, no jewelry, but there was something about the way she held herself, something quietly commanding. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, were studying him as though she already knew his story. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice more breath than word. "I've been waiting for you," she said. He blinked. "I thought my name wasn't on the list." "It wasn't," she replied, "but it should have been. Come with me." The receptionist looked between them, startled. Ethan hesitated only a second before following the woman down the hall, past open offices and collaborative workspaces, where young architects hovered over glowing monitors. The buzz of quiet productivity surrounded them. She led him into a room at the end of the corridor, less of an office, more of a studio. Architectural models lined one side, hand-drawn blueprints the other. A drafting table stood near the window, covered in pencil sketches, most of them done by hand. Ethan noticed immediately. That wasn't common anymore. She gestured toward a chair. "Sit, please." He obeyed. "I'm Natalie Brennan," she said, sitting across from him. "My family owns this firm, but I only recently moved back from Florence. I'm overseeing our new community design initiative, and I came across something yesterday in the discard pile." She reached into her folder and pulled out a wrinkled sheet of paper, Ethan's hand-drawn blueprint. A park. No, not just a park. A haven. Trees woven around play spaces, winding paths for wheelchairs, sensory gardens for children with autism, shaded benches facing open lawns. all drawn with the tenderness of someone who understood that public space should feel like home to everyone. This, Natalie said softly, stopped me cold. Ethan cleared his throat. I, it's old. I just included it because it's all I had left that wasn't digital. Exactly, she replied. It's not efficient, it's not slick, but it's real. And someone who draws like this isn't just designing a space, they're protecting it. He looked down, unsure what to say. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Mr. Cole, why did you stop designing? The question landed hard. Ethan's jaw tightened. My wife passed away 8 years ago. I left architecture to take care of my daughter. She's had 5 heart surgeries. I worked odd jobs to stay flexible, garage work, handyman repairs. I didn't think I'd be allowed back in this world. Not really, Natalie didn't flinch. What made you apply here? He met her eyes, then quietly resolute. Because my daughter looked at me last week and said, Dad, I want to see the buildings you always talk about, the ones you dream about. And I realized she's never seen me create anything, just fix broken things. I wanted her to see her father do what he loves, at least once. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, Natalie smiled. It was small but real. I don't believe in accidents, she said. I believe the right people arrive when they're meant to. You're not late. You're right on time. Ethan exhaled slowly, something loosening in his chest. You won't be designing high-rises, she said. Not yet, but I'm leading a project to rebuild a section of the old Harbor District low-income housing, a community clinic, a school playground. We need someone who remembers what it means to build with your hands. Would you consider joining us temporary to start? Ethan blinked. Seriously, she extended her hand. I think we could use a little more heart around here. And as he took her hand, Ethan felt it, that flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope, not yet, but the memory of it. And for now, that was enough. The office Natalie led him to the next day was nothing like the glass and steel world Ethan remembered from his earlier career. It was tucked into the back of the building, adjacent to a storage room that still smelled faintly of cardboard and toner ink. The desk was old, the chair squeaked, and the window looked out over the loading dock. Still, it was the first space in nearly a decade that belonged to him, a place where he wasn't just passing through. Natalie handed him a temporary badge clipped to a lanyard. You'll shadow me on the Harbor District project for now. We're just starting the site concept phase. I want you to sketch ideas, any idea. Don't overthink it. Just draw. He nodded, clutching the badge like it might vanish if he blinked. She glanced at his hands. Do you have everything you need? I brought my pencils, he said, and some brown butcher paper I use at home. I draw on the back of Ellie's old school posters. It's a habit. Natalie smiled faintly but not unkindly. Then we're off to a good start. She left him with a roll of blueprints, a rough site plan, and a note in clean handwriting. Don't design a building. Design a place where people heal. It had been so long since anyone asked him to create something from the inside out. For years, Ethan's hands had been used to tighten bolts and unclog drains, but this morning they shook for a different reason as he sharpened a pencil and unrolled the brown paper across the desk. He stared at the blank space for a long while before sketching the first line. A curve, soft like a path through a park rather than a street. Then he added a bench low to the ground wrapped around the trunk of an old oak tree. A garden maze for children. A shaded alcove near the clinic where patients could rest, read, or just breathe. He forgot the clock, forgot the sounds outside. When Natalie returned 2 hours later, he didn't hear her at first. She leaned quietly in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. When he finally noticed her, he sat up quickly, a little embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't know how much you wanted. She stepped closer, studying the lines he'd drawn with the reverence of someone reading a letter meant only for them. No, Ethan, this is beautiful. He rubbed the back of his neck. I wasn't sure if it was too emotional. It's exactly what I hoped you'd do, she said. Most architects are obsessed with symmetry and scale. You're thinking about silence and shade and where people's eyes rest when they're grieving. That's rare, he said nothing, but her words landed somewhere deep in a place he thought had long closed up shop. Later that day, they visited the site together. The Harbor District was little more than a neglected cluster of brick buildings and cracked pavement The kind of place city officials talked about redeveloping in campaign speeches and then forgot. Weeds burst through sidewalks. Chain-link fences sagged under their own weight. A stray cat darted across the road as Ethan stepped out of the truck. "We'll start here," Natalie said, pointing to an old community center that had been boarded up since the pandemic. "It'll be a mix of housing, playgrounds, gardens. We want to preserve the bones of the place, though. It has memory." Ethan ran a hand along the rusted fence. "Places like this raise kids like me. There's strength in that, just buried under neglect." He bent down and picked up a piece of broken brick. "You ever notice the ones who have the least always build the most beautiful things with it?" Natalie looked at him thoughtful. "That's why I pulled your file out of the reject stack." He looked over curious. "She explained your application was set aside by HR, said you didn't meet the current software requirements. But I found your drawings hand-drawn, smudged at the corners and so full of life. I don't need another intern fluent in SketchUp. I needed someone who remembers why we do this." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I wasn't sure if this world had space for someone like me anymore." Natalie smiled, and for a second the steel in her melted. "Then let's make space." That night back home, Ethan tucked Ellie into bed. Her tiny body curled under a quilt covered in stars, the room dim but warm with string lights she'd insisted on leaving up since Christmas. "How was it, Daddy?" she whispered, voice thready. He smoothed her hair. "I got to draw again. Real drawing, for real people." She smiled sleepily. "Did they like it?" "They did." Her eyelids fluttered. "Can you make a building with clouds on the ceiling?" He chuckled softly. "I can try." She looked up at him. "Make it so people don't feel scared there." That stayed with him long after she fell asleep. Back in his small makeshift studio, really just a corner of the kitchen, he pulled out another piece of paper and began sketching again. This time adding soft overhead curves, warm lighting pockets, and hidden corners where someone could sit alone, yet still feel held by the space around them. It wasn't just about architecture anymore. It was about building places the way he wished the world had built one for him when he lost everything. And maybe this new place, this new chapter, wasn't about going back to who he once was. Maybe it was about becoming something better, something whole, for his daughter, for himself, for the strangers whose lives would quietly change when they stepped into a place built by a man who knew what it meant to start again. The morning sun broke gently over the harbor district, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks and graffiti-covered walls. Ethan stood by the edge of the lot with a rolled blueprint under one arm and his daughter Ellie's small hand nestled in his. Her other hand clutched a worn stuffed bear, its fur matted from years of surgeries, waiting rooms, and sleepless nights. "Is this it?" she asked, squinting into the light. "This is it," Ethan replied, his voice soft but proud. They stood in front of the old community center, boarded up, vines strangled, forgotten by most. To the left, a patch of uneven asphalt stretched out toward a row of vacant townhouses with shuttered windows. But to Ethan, it wasn't ruin. It was potential. Every brick, every crack whispered of something waiting to be redeemed. Natalie pulled into the gravel lot a few minutes later in a compact SUV. She stepped out in jeans and a navy blouse, a thermos in one hand, and a binder tucked under her arm. Her eyes went immediately to Ellie. "You must be Ellie," she said, her voice warm, unguarded. Ellie, ever the old soul, studied her for a moment before nodding. "You look like someone who reads a lot." Natalie laughed. "Guilty." "Good," Ellie said, then turned her gaze back to the building. "So where will the clouds go?" "The clouds?" Natalie asked, glancing at Ethan. "She wants a ceiling that looks like the sky," Ethan explained, half apologetic. "To help people feel less afraid." Natalie's expression softened. "I think that's a beautiful idea." As they walked the perimeter, Ethan narrated his initial sketches to Natalie, while Ellie trailed behind, sometimes skipping, sometimes stopping to peer into broken windows or run her fingers along brick walls. "I want to leave the original archways," Ethan said. "They have character. And I thought we could wrap a sensory garden around this side, herbs, textures, things the kids can touch." Natalie nodded. "What about the clinic entrance, discreet but dignified?" Ethan answered. "People shouldn't feel like they're walking into a place for the sick. They should feel like they're entering a space built for them." She turned to look at him. "Really look." His eyes weren't simply focused, they carried memory, empathy, something deeper than design. He wasn't drawing from theory, he was building from experience. That's exactly what this project needs, she said quietly. Ethan offered a half smile but said nothing. Compliments still sat awkwardly on his shoulders. By late morning, Ellie grew tired. Ethan helped her sit on a stack of concrete blocks under a patch of shade, offering her the apple slices he'd packed in a Ziploc. She took them wordlessly and leaned against his arm. Natalie watched the two of them from a few steps away. She saw it then, the small, daily sacrifices that never made the news. The gentle way Ethan checked his daughter's temperature without using a thermometer, simply by pressing his lips to her temple. The way Ellie instinctively leaned into his side when construction noise startled her. This wasn't a man trying to get his life back on track. This was a man who had chosen love over legacy and now was being asked to do both. Later, as they reviewed site notes back at the office, Natalie found herself distracted. Ethan's sketch had stayed with her, not just the shapes, but the intentionality. The curved benches near the pediatric clinic angled just so the late afternoon sun would warm the backs of tired parents. The treehouse bridge designed not just for play, but for wonder. She spoke without thinking. Did you ever consider teaching? Ethan looked up. Me, yes. You have this way of making people see. Not just imagine. He paused. I used to mentor interns at my old firm. Before, everything changed. I liked it. She nodded slowly. I think you'd be good at it, especially for the team we're building. We're trying to focus less on just delivering structures and more on designing emotional spaces. Ethan raised a brow. Emotional spaces? It's a term I picked up in Italy, she said with a faint smile. It means creating spaces where the design responds to how people feel, not just what they need. Spaces that comfort, affirm, and quietly say, you belong here. He nodded thoughtfully. I like that. As the afternoon wore on, Natalie caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but with a growing curiosity. Who was this man who reemerged from years of heartbreak, not bitter, but kinder? What held him together, and why, despite all logic, did being near him make her feel steadier? That evening, Ethan returned home and gently placed Ellie's drawings on their fridge. Crayon sketches of gardens, bright stars, and floating clouds surrounded a central image, a crooked little building with a curved roof and a bench beneath a tree. He stared at it for a long time. Then he opened his drafting pad again. This time he drew not for work, not for approval, not for the firm. He drew a window in the ceiling of a child's bedroom, a view of the sky, and he wrote above it, a place where people aren't afraid to dream. The next time Natalie saw Ethan, he was already seated in the break room, sketching intently on the back of what looked like a flattened cereal box. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, streaking his page with gold. He looked up as she entered, then smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached the creases at the corners of his eyes. Out of paper already, she asked, nodding toward the makeshift canvas. He chuckled, brushing a pencil, shaving from his wrist. Ellie spilled orange juice on my sketch pad. This was the only clean surface in the house. She set her coffee down beside him and leaned over to examine his drawing. It was a rough perspective of a rooftop play area, complete with safety rails, climbing nets, and canopies shaped like overlapping clouds. I figured, he said, if you're going to make the sky part of the design, might as well let the kids reach for it. She studied the sketch, then his face. You always draw like this. From feeling first, then function. He shrugged. I don't know how to separate them. Natalie sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim. There was a gentleness in him that felt increasingly rare. A kind of softness earned not from comfort, but from having walked through fire and emerged quieter, not harder. You ever build something just for yourself? She asked. Ethan set his pencil down. No, not since college. Everything since then has been for work, or for survival. Natalie nodded slowly, then hesitated. I've never built anything for myself either. He looked up. The shift in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Vulnerable. Careful. People assume, she continued, that because I have this job, this office, I must have had everything lined up. But the truth is, I left Florence because I had nowhere else to go. She paused. He didn't interrupt. I was married once. Briefly. We lost a baby halfway through the pregnancy. Heart defect. I spent months blaming my body, then my husband. Then I just disappeared into work. Florence was supposed to be a reset, but it turns out you can't outrun absence. Ethan's gaze softened. I'm sorry, she met his eyes. I don't talk about it much. You don't have to explain anything, he said quietly, but thank you for telling me. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. A shared space carved out of truth, both of them sitting in the debris of what they'd lost, not to fix it, but to simply say, you're not alone in this. Natalie stood and gathered herself. We're meeting with the city tomorrow. They're skeptical about funding anything emotional, but I think if you present the vision yourself, we might just get through. Ethan blinked. Me? You're the heart of this thing, Ethan. Let them hear it from you. He hesitated. I haven't spoken in front of people in years. Not like that. She offered a reassuring smile. Then let them hear from the man who builds benches for grieving parents and windows for scared kids. He nodded slowly, unsure if it was courage or panic rising in his chest. That evening, as dusk settled over their apartment, Ethan worked quietly at the dining table while Ellie painted nearby. She dipped her brush into a puddle of blue and smeared a bold sky across a cardboard panel. A cotton ball sun hovered in the corner. Is it okay if my clouds are purple? She asked. Of course, he said, glancing up. The best skies are the ones people don't expect. She beamed, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Then, as if remembering something serious, she put her brush down. Daddy, yeah, bug. If I ever have surgery again, can I look up and see this sky? Ethan froze. I mean, in the room. On the ceiling, she added more quietly. Like you draw for other people. His voice caught. Yes, I'll build you a room with a sky of your own. She nodded once as satisfied and went back to her painting. And Ethan, overwhelmed with a wave of something old and new love, fear, hope, returned to his presentation notes with a quiet determination. He wouldn't just show the city plans and numbers. He would show them Ellie's purple clouds, the kind of sky you didn't expect, but needed more than anything. The next morning, the city council chamber smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Natalie sat beside Ethan at the long presentation table, papers neatly arranged, tablet ready. Ethan wore his only blazer slightly too tight in the shoulders. His hands trembled beneath the table. They'll be cold at first, Natalie whispered. Don't let that shake you. Just speak like you're talking to Ellie. He nodded, and when his name was called, he rose. The council members looked skeptical. Another architect, another proposal, another person asking them to spend city money on a project that would only please a few. But then Ethan began. He didn't lead with numbers. He didn't mention permits or tax incentives. He told them about a little girl who once lay in a hospital room, too white, too quiet, too afraid. About a father who used to dream in steel and glass, but traded blueprints for IV schedules. About how dignity was a form of healing. How beauty wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity for people learning to hope again. He ended with a photo. Ellie's drawing. The crooked building. The tree. The sky filled with purple clouds. The room was still. Then the councilwoman in the center, stoic, gray-haired eyes, hard cleared her throat. Mr. Cole, is your daughter well now? She's stable, he said, but her heart is tired. A beat passed. We'll fund phase 1, she said. Ethan blinked. You will. We need more people who draw skies like that, the woman murmured. Even purple ones. After the meeting, Natalie didn't say anything at first. She simply stepped beside him as they walked out into the late morning sun, then gently bumped her shoulder against his. You did it. No, he said, blinking back, something fierce in his eyes. We did. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sketches, site visits, and team meetings. Ethan found himself settling into a rhythm he hadn't felt in years, not since the days before hospital beds and breathing monitors, before the slow erosion of a career quietly sacrificed for the sake of love. But here now his hands built again. Not with wrenches or drywall, but with intention and imagination. Every line on the blueprint was drawn with someone specific in mind. A grieving father, a recovering child, a nurse catching a breath between rounds. One Thursday afternoon, Natalie stopped by his workstation, carrying 2 coffees and a manila envelope. Her blouse was wrinkled, her ponytail slightly askew, and there was a smudge of graphite near her temple. Ethan thought she looked more like herself this way than she ever did in the polished boardroom meetings. Someone from archives dropped this off for you, she said, setting the envelope on his desk. Said it was left in the old HR files. Looks like it was never opened. Ethan frowned. The envelope was aged, the corners curled and yellowed. His name was written on it in blue ink, familiar slanted handwriting he hadn't seen in years. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly tore it open. Inside were two things, a short note and a folded letter on floral stationery. The note was typed. Mr. Sonab. Cole, this letter was submitted with your daughter's medical paperwork 7 years ago. It was intended to reach you after the final surgery. Unfortunately, due to administrative transitions, it was misplaced. Natalie hovered, sensing the shift in the air. Do you want me to? No, Ethan said softly. It's okay. He unfolded the letter. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you stayed. You fought through the surgeries and the late-night ER visits. You showed up every day for Ellie the way I knew you would. I'm sorry I left you with this burden. I never meant to go, but I also never doubted you could do it. You always said you weren't the hero, that you were just a man who could fix broken things. But you were wrong. You were always building something more. Not houses, not parks, but safety, family. You are the home our daughter will remember. I loved you so much, Ethan, and I still do. Please, and when the time is right, let someone else love you too. Julia. His breath caught in his throat. The sounds of the office dimmed. The buzzing lights, the ticking clock, the low hum of conversation all faded behind the quiet roar in his chest. Natalie didn't speak. She simply placed a hand on the edge of the table, grounding him. Present. After a long silence, he folded the letter with care and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't expect this, he said, voice hoarse. Not today. Natalie nodded. Do you want some air? He rose and followed her to the rooftop terrace where potted plants leaned into the early autumn wind. The city stretched beyond gray and familiar. I used to wonder if she blamed me, he admitted, for not saving her, for not doing more. She didn't, Natalie said quietly. She knew exactly who you were. He turned to her. You ever think there are some people we're not meant to move on from? She met his gaze. Maybe. Or maybe we don't move on. Maybe we just carry them forward into something new. He looked away, jaw tight. I don't know how to do that. Start with tomorrow, she said, one moment at a time. That evening, Ethan sat beside Ellie as she colored a paper mural of the Harbor District, or at least her version of it. There were clouds with smiling faces, buildings with arms, and a central playground shaped like a giant sun. Daddy, she said without looking up, do you think Mommy can see this? He paused. I think she sees everything, Bug. Ellie nodded. Do you miss her every day? Me too, she whispered. Then after a beat, do you think it's okay if we're happy now? The question cracked something open in him. He pulled her close. I think that's what she always wanted. The next morning, Ethan returned to the site early, arriving before anyone else. The sun hadn't yet crested over the rooftops, and the site was bathed in gray-blue quiet. He stood in the middle of the lot, breathing in the silence. Then, almost without thinking, he took the letter from his coat pocket, unfolded it again, and read it under the open sky. I'm going to keep building, he murmured, for her, for Ellie, for all of us. A wind picked up, gentle and warm. He closed his eyes and let it pass through him. When he turned around, Natalie was at the gate watching. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. But the look in her eyes, steady, kind, unafraid, said everything he needed. He walked toward her and didn't stop. The construction site lay bathed in the soft glow of lamplights as the rest of the team filed out for the evening. Sheet metal clanged somewhere in the distance, a lullaby of industry that felt oddly comforting to Ethan. He was alone at his drafting table, an old wooden door laid across sawhorses tracing soft pencil lines on a crisp sheet of vellum. He lifted his head when he heard the soft click of the office door. Natalie stepped in carrying 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. Her hair was loose, tonight strands escaping the usual bun to frame her face in gentle curls. She moved with an ease he'd come to recognize, purposeful, without appearing to try. I thought you might need this, she said, setting a mug beside him. Thank you. Ethan inhaled the herbal scent and wrapped his hands around the warm cup. I didn't realize how late it was. Natalie glanced at the clock. I didn't either. After you found that letter, I thought you might want time to process. I'll Clean up in a bit. He met her eyes hesitant. You don't have to, she winked. I insisted on staying. Besides, this place is a mess, and I make a mean chamomile. They shared a quiet laugh as the hum of machinery wound down outside. Ethan returned to his drawing a play pavilion woven between two magnolia trees, its roof a luminous, cloud-like canopy of white polycarbonate panels. His hand paused mid-stroke when he felt a shift in the air. He looked up to see Natalie standing beside him, holding a slim portfolio. I thought you might like to see something, she said, sliding onto the spare stool across from him. He watched as she opened the portfolio, revealing photographs and sketches of a garden she'd helped design in Florence. The page turned revealed an intricacy of stone pathways, winding around a marble fountain beds of lavender, hedged in soft curves and hidden alcoves framed by rose arches. The pictures were from her own notebook pages, still smelling faintly of Italian sunshine and jasmine. This was in Siena, Natalie explained. When I was there, I realized people needed a space that felt like a living memory. Not just a fountain or a bench, but a place that held stories. Ethan leaned forward, tracing a finger along the photograph of a stone bench carved with initials and dates. It's beautiful. You designed this? She nodded. With a team. I learned to listen first to the history of the site, to the locals' memories, even to my own. She paused, her gaze drifting to the wall beyond Ethan's shoulder, as though watching ghosts of her past. I lost someone there. He set his tea down and met her gaze. I'm sorry. She swallowed, gathering her breath. My son, she said softly. My only child. We knew he wouldn't live past infancy, so I built that garden for him to leave something beautiful behind. Ethan's heart seized. I didn't know. It's not something I bring up, she admitted. After he died, I buried myself in work. I thought if I kept designing, kept moving, I could outrun the grief. She closed the portfolio and tucked it beside him. But sometimes grief needs a place to live too. Ethan reached across the table, placing his hand lightly over hers. The touch was feather light but carried the weight of everything they'd shared. Loss, hope, late-night conferences, phone calls from hospital rooms. You're not alone, he whispered. Her eyes glistened, the lamplight catching the moisture. She gave him a small, grateful smile and gently removed his hand. Thank you. For a long moment they sat in silence, hands wrapped around mugs half forgotten, listening to the building settle in the cold air. Then Ethan rose and fetched his jacket from the coat rack. Let me, he said, slipping it over her shoulders. She curled into the warmth of the wool, and he straightened, smoothing the lapels so they sat neatly. She looked up at him, startled by the gesture. You're always cold, he said. And it's October. She touched the collar, her fingers brushing his hand. You always notice. His throat bobbed. He wanted to say so much more about how much her presence mattered, how much her quiet strength inspired him, but the words felt too raw, too ripe to release just now. Instead, he simply nodded. Finish up here, she said, voice light again. I'll lock up. He returned to his drawing, but the lines he made afterward were softer, more tentative, more lyrical. He added a narrow window high in the pavilion wall, where daylight would filter through colored glass like shards of morning. Beneath it, he sketched an alcove bench with carved hearts and initials real, and imagined to honor both Eli, his future dreams, and the boy Natalie had lost. Natalie flicked off the lights in the main office and stepped into the hallway. The night air had cooled further, and the distant hum of the city had grown faint. She paused outside the drafting room and listened. Ethan's pencil strokes were gentle, deliberate. She thought about the first day they'd met when he'd sketched that playground, and how every chapter since had been about rebuilding trust in himself, in kindness, and perhaps in love. She exhaled, steeling herself. Stepping inside, she leaned against the doorframe. He looked up, expression curious. Mind if I stay a moment? Not at all, he said, setting down his pencil. She crossed to him, placing a hand over the newly drawn window and tracing the colored glass with her fingertip. I can feel it. He watched her heart pounding. It's for Ellie, he said, and for everyone who walks through that gate feeling too small or too scared. She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his intention. Then softly, and for those of us who need a sky of our own. His breath caught. He moved closer until their shoulders touched. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there. Two people tethered by grief and guided by hope, their shared purpose blossoming into something neither had expected. Finally, Natalie opened her eyes and stepped back, smoothing her jacket. "I should go," she said, voice hushed. Ethan watched her collect her things. "Thank you," he said, meaning it in a way that resonated deeper than any blueprint. She offered a small, luminous smile. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Natalie." As she closed the door behind her, Ethan reached out once more, almost instinctively, to touch the window sketch. He imagined light streaming through its soft, refracted colors, dancing on curious faces below. And in that moment, he understood that this project was more than bricks and mortar. It was a testament to quiet courage, to lives rebuilt brick by brick, and to the gentle current of a love that flowed quietly beneath it all. The first sign was so small, Ethan nearly missed it. Ellie didn't finish her pancakes. She didn't complain, didn't cry, just pushed the plate aside and rested her head on her folded arms at the kitchen table. The morning sun washed across her face, turning the circles under her eyes a faint lavender. "You okay, Bug?" Ethan asked, crouching next to her. She nodded, but her voice was thin. "Just tired." Ethan brushed his knuckles across her forehead. Warm, warmer than usual. He waited for a moment, just watching her breathe, then gently placed a hand over her chest, right where her heart beat softly beneath her favorite astronaut pajama shirt. It felt off. Not alarming. Not yet, but off. At the office, Natalie was already mid-discussion with a structural engineer when Ethan arrived. The construction phase was nearing, and the Harbor District project had picked up speed permits, approved community support, rising donations beginning to trickle in. "Morning," she said, her face lighting up as she turned toward him. "We've got to finalize the materials for the pavilion roof. The supplier in Vermont called with Ethan." She paused. Something in his face gave him away. He didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ellie didn't eat this morning," he said. "She's warm. I know her color and it's off. Her last checkup was good, but it doesn't feel right." Natalie's expression softened. "You think it's her heart? I don't know," he exhaled. "And I don't want to panic, but I also don't want to gamble." She nodded, already reaching for her phone. "Go. Take her in. I'll handle things here." He looked at her, really looked grateful beyond words, but then he hesitated. "We've got the donor tour next week, and the foundation review panel." "If I'm gone too long, Ethan," she interrupted gently, stepping closer. "You don't have to explain. We built this place to honor love. That starts with your daughter. Go." The room around them faded. It was just the two of them, two people holding too many lives in their hands, trying to do right by all of them. He nodded. At the hospital, familiar walls greeted them like ghosts. Nurses who remembered Ellie's name, pediatricians who still wore colorful socks to make kids smile, waiting room chairs that squeaked in protest. The tests were immediate. Blood work, vitals, ECG. Ethan sat by Ellie's side, sketch pad forgotten in his lap, his hand wrapped around hers. She didn't say much, just looked at the ceiling tiles and whispered every now and then, "I'm okay, Daddy." But when Dr. Siegel came in, holding the clipboard against her chest like a shield, Ethan knew. "The valve's weakening," she said quietly. "It's not immediate, but it's coming sooner than we hoped." He blinked. A timeline could be months, could be weeks. She'll need another procedure, possibly another graft. And we need to prep you both for the transplant list again. Ethan closed his eyes. He had known this was possible, likely even. But knowing it in theory was different than hearing it spelled out under fluorescent lights while your little girl lay quietly beside you, too tired to even ask questions. He nodded. "Okay." But inside, everything cracked. That night, Ethan sat by Ellie's bed as she slept, the soft beep of machines punctuating the silence. He opened his sketch pad, flipped past pages of pavilions and gardens and colored glass skies. He stopped at the one he'd drawn weeks ago. A bench under a tree, a window to the clouds, a girl reaching up. His pencil hovered over the image, but he didn't draw. Back at the office, Natalie worked late alone this time. The team had wrapped up hours ago, the construction crew scheduled to begin framing by the end of the week. She should have been excited. They'd fought hard for this, rallied city officials, donors, even local artists to participate in the community mural that would grace the outer wall of the new center. But Ethan's absence was a shadow that stretched across every corner of the studio. She stared at his empty desk, then at the design board where his latest rendering hung, a side entryway, with a quote etched into stone beneath the arch. Hope is a place you enter, not a feeling you wait for. Her throat tightened. Just then her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Still in the hospital. She's stable but not great. I may need to step away longer. I'm sorry, Nat. She stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Nothing to be sorry for. Take care of her. We're not building without you. Then after a moment, tell Ellie I'm saving a patch of sky just for her. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then 8. And the project pressed on, but slower, more cautious. Natalie met with the board-delivered presentations, even did interviews with local press. But Ethan's absence left a void no substitute could fill. His designs weren't just drawings. They were reasons. So on the 9th day, she did something she hadn't done in years. She drove to the hospital. Ethan looked up as she stepped into the room. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were shadowed, his shirt wrinkled. But he stood when he saw her, careful not to wake Ellie, who lay curled beneath a knit blanket. You shouldn't have come, he whispered. I needed to. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was a set of ink samples, brilliant blues and soft violets. I want you to design the mural, she said. He blinked. You already had an artist. They backed out. But even if they hadn't, I'd still want it to be you. It should be Ellie's sky. His throat tightened. I don't even know how long I can be here, or what happens next. Natalie stepped closer. Her voice was quiet but clear. Then we draw while we wait. He looked at her eyes rimmed with exhaustion but full of something else, now something tender, tethered unspoken. He reached for the box and nodded. The first brushstroke was a hesitant one. Ethan stood on the scaffolding outside the old community center, a paintbrush in hand staring at the 20-foot wide stretch of primed stucco wall. Below him, construction crews worked steadily installing the frame for the curved pavilion roof, while volunteers planted young trees in fresh soil. The once-forgotten harbor district was coming alive, and now it needed its sky. Natalie watched from the sidewalk, arms crossed, brow furrowed, not in critique, but in concentration. The morning was cool and overcast, casting soft, even light across the mural space. She had insisted the wall be left untouched until Ethan returned. And now he was here, sleeves rolled, sketchbook pages fluttering in the wind behind him. I'm not a painter, he muttered down to her. This could be a disaster. You're the one who taught me buildings should speak, Natalie called back. Let this one sing. He dipped the brush again. The mural began as a swirl of pale blue near the corner, like a whisper of morning. Then a band of deeper cobalt. Soft purple clouds curled into the corners, Ellie's favorite. And slowly the shape of a sky formed across the wall. Not a realistic depiction, but something dreamlike. A sky remembered more than observed. Each line Ethan painted wasn't perfect, but each one meant something. And Natalie saw it, felt it. As days passed, the mural grew faster than expected. Word spread in the neighborhood, and soon kids showed up with their own drawings, hoping to have a corner included. Ellie's sketch of a tree with stars in its branches became the centerpiece. Beneath it, a curved bench took shape in the real pavilion space, matching the one in Ethan's original rendering. Ethan didn't speak much while he painted, but Natalie noticed the change in him. The furrow in his brow had softened. His shoulders no longer hunched like they bore invisible weights. Something inside him had begun to heal one brushstroke at a time. In the evenings, he sat beside Ellie in her hospital room, recounting each new addition to the mural. I made your cloud bigger today, he told her one night, smoothing her hair behind her ear. It stretches over the reading corner now. That way, if it ever rains, the storybooks stay dry. Ellie smiled faintly. Can you put stars in it too, stars in the clouds? He asked, amused. Why not? She replied with a sleepy grin. Some skies are magic. He kissed her forehead. Then we'll make it magic. One Saturday afternoon, Natalie brought over a thermos of coffee and sat beside him as he touched up a detail, a translucent window above the pavilion entrance. Her presence was familiar, now grounding. You've been quiet today, she said softly. Ethan wiped the back of his hand against his cheek. Just thinking. About Ellie? He nodded, always. She placed a gentle hand on his knee. How is she? Stable, but tired. The transplant list is moving slow. We're trying to stay hopeful. Natalie hesitated, then said, Have you thought about what comes next? He looked at her eyes wary. I mean, she continued carefully after the project. After the hospital, after this, his voice was low. I stopped making plans a long time ago. I know, she said, but maybe it's time. Ethan looked away, watching the children playing on the makeshift lawn, their laughter ringing through the air like music. He swallowed. I'm scared to hope too much, he admitted. What if I hope and it breaks me? She reached over, gently taking the brush from his fingers and dipping it into a bright gold hue. Then we break together, she said, placing the brush back in his hand. And we build again, like always. Ethan stared at the color. It shimmered in the sunlight. And then, without a word, he painted a golden ribbon across the base of the mural, winding through the trees across the grass, curling beneath the stars. A path, a thread, something that connected all of it. When he stepped back, Natalie stood beside him. What is it, she asked. A promise, he said quietly, that no matter how hard it gets, there's still light. 2 weeks later, the mural was done. The grand reveal brought city officials, donors, families, and news cameras. Children tugged their parents' hands toward their drawings embedded in the larger scene. Volunteers brought lemonade and folding chairs. For the first time in years, the Harbor District echoed, not with warnings or weariness, but with celebration. Natalie stood before the crowd with a microphone, nerves fluttering beneath her composed exterior. This project began with a simple question, she said. How do we build spaces that heal? She paused, glancing at Ethan standing off to the side, with paint still clinging to his knuckles, Ellie's drawing in his back pocket. We build them with heart, with hands that remember loss and still choose beauty, with skies painted in purple and gold because a little girl said clouds should sparkle. The crowd chuckled softly. She continued, her voice growing steadier. This place was designed by more than architects. It was designed by life itself, by fathers and daughters, by grief and resilience, by strangers who became family. Her eyes found Ethan's, and in the quiet, in the waiting, something unexpected bloomed. Not just hope, but love. Ethan blinked. For a moment he forgot the crowd, forgot the cameras, forgot everything except the woman standing on the stage, the way her words had carried not just grace but truth. He had not expected love to find him again, but here it was. Not loud, not sweeping, but steady and real. As the applause rolled over them like waves, Ellie's nurse stepped quietly to Ethan's side with a phone in hand. The transplant coordinator just called, she whispered. We may have a match. Ethan turned stunned. Natalie saw his expression and stepped off the stage immediately. What is it, she asked, breath catching. He looked at her, eyes wide, voice trembling. It's happening. The hospital room had that particular stillness reserved for moments when time refuses to move. Beeping machines pulsed a steady rhythm, and outside the window the city's lights blinked like distant stars, close enough to see, too far to reach. Ethan sat beside Ellie's bed, holding her hand loosely, as if gripping it too tightly might somehow change the outcome. Her tiny wrist was wrapped in gauze, the IV line snaking up to a saline bag. Her eyes were closed, breath even, but each rise and fall of her chest felt like a prayer unspoken. The transplant team had moved quickly. The donor heart had arrived under police escort an hour ago. Paperwork had been signed, risks reviewed, hope offered like a fragile promise. She asked if you'd stay, a nurse had whispered to him earlier, through the night. She said she sleeps better if she knows you're not leaving. He hadn't planned to go anywhere. Natalie arrived just before midnight, carrying a small duffel bag and a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I brought the tea you like, she said gently, setting it on the windowsill. Chamomile with honey this time. Ethan didn't look up right away. His thumb was tracing circles on Ellie's hand. Thanks. Natalie crossed to the other side of the bed and sat down without speaking. The two of them just watched her, this small warrior who had endured more in 10 years than most did in a lifetime. After a while, Ethan whispered, She doesn't even know how serious this is. She knows enough, Natalie said softly, and she trusts you. I'm scared, he said, the words breaking loose from someplace deep, not of the surgery, or even the outcome. I'm scared of what happens if I let hope in, and it leaves again. Natalie reached across the bed and took his free hand. Then let me hold it for you until you're ready again. Her fingers were warm, steady, and he didn't pull away. They waited through the night. At 1:47 a.m., the surgical team arrived, gowned in pale blue, masked, focused. One doctor explained the timeline again, The risks, the necessary weight. Ethan nodded without hearing much. When they wheeled Ellie out, her fingers slipped from his like a thread unraveling. Then silence. The waiting room felt cavernous, not in size, but in weight. Families murmured softly. A vending machine blinked in a corner. Someone cried into a sweatshirt sleeve 3 rows down. And Ethan sat motionless, eyes fixed on a spot in the floor where the tile was cracked. Natalie sat beside him, legs crossed at the ankles, hands folded in her lap. He finally spoke. "You didn't have to come, I know, but you did." She turned toward him. "I didn't come to help. I came because I couldn't be anywhere else." He looked at her then. The exhaustion on his face didn't diminish the truth behind his eyes, a truth that had been growing slowly and steadily since the day she said, "Don't go." "Before Julia died," he said, voice low, "she made me promise that I wouldn't disappear into grief, that I'd let someone in again when I was ready." He paused. "I wasn't ready for a long time." Natalie's voice was barely above a whisper, and now he swallowed. "Now I'm terrified, but I want to try." A beat passed. Then she reached over and rested her head gently on his shoulder. "No promises," she murmured, "just presence." And that was enough. Hours passed. The sun crept up slowly, turning the hospital windows amber and gold. Coffee grew cold. Visitors came and went. Ethan barely moved. Finally, at 6:12 a.m., the surgical doors opened. Dr. Siegel stepped into the waiting area, mask off, face drawn with fatigue. Ethan stood. His heart slammed against his ribs. The doctor's mouth curled slowly into a smile. "She did great," she said. "The graft took beautifully. Her new heart is strong." Ethan exhaled a ragged, tear-wet, full-bodied breath that left him trembling. Natalie squeezed his hand so tightly he felt her heartbeat against his skin. "She's not awake yet," Dr. Siegel continued, "but you can see her in recovery shortly." He nodded, unable to speak. Relief rolled over him in waves, sharp and cleansing, purging weeks, years of fear. He sat back down, hard head in his hands. Natalie knelt beside him. "You made it," she said. "No," he replied, voice cracking. "She made it." He looked at her, eyes shining. "But I wouldn't have made it without you." She brushed a tear from his cheek. "I'll be here, Ethan, however long it takes." When they were allowed in, Ellie looked small against the white sheets, but peaceful. Her chest rose steadily, color returning to her cheeks. There were tubes and monitors, but beneath them, her face carried something light, something free. Ethan leaned in and whispered, "You did it, Bug." Her eyelids fluttered. Natalie stood just behind him, silent, reverent. In that room, there was no architecture, no deadlines, no speeches. Just 3 people held together by something unspoken, something far stronger than steel or stone. Love. Later, as they walked down the hospital corridor together, Ethan turned to Natalie. "When this is over," he said, "when she's home and the dust settles, I want to build something for us." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Like a house." Maybe he smiled, but I was thinking more like a life. She stopped. "You sure?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm ready to try." She stepped closer and rested a hand over his heart. "Then let's draw the blueprint together." The house felt too quiet without the hum of medical machines. No IV pole in the hallway, no beeping monitors or pre-dawn nurse check-ins. Just the soft rustle of sheets and the gentle click of dishes in the sink as Ethan prepared breakfast. Ellie was home, and though her steps were slower and her voice still thin from weeks in the hospital, her heart beat steady and strong, a rhythm Ethan would never again take for granted. He stood in the kitchen now, watching the sunlight spill across the hardwood floor, casting golden rectangles through the window. It was the first morning in nearly 2 months that didn't begin with hospital corridors and plastic chairs. Behind him, he heard the soft shuffle of slippered feet. Daddy Ethan turned. Ellie stood in the doorway in her star-patterned robe, her hair pulled back into 2 uneven ponytails. He smiled. "Morning, Bug." She patted forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. "It smells like cinnamon." He knelt down. "French toast." Natalie dropped off a loaf of that brioche you love. Ellie tilted her head. "Is she coming over?" "Maybe later," Ethan said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "She's at the community center today, opening day." Oh, Ellie's eyes lit up. "Can we go?" Ethan hesitated. Only if you're feeling up to it. I want to see the sky, she said softly. The one you painted. The Harbor Haven Community Center, formerly the crumbling heart of the Harbor District, now stood gleaming with fresh paint, reclaimed brick, and light pouring from wide, welcoming windows. The smell of new wood mingled with the scent of blooming jasmine from the nearby sensory garden. Children's laughter echoed from the new playground, and families strolled through wide tree-lined walkways that wound through flower beds and picnic spaces. And above it all, the mural stretched proudly across the main exterior wall, a swirl of sky and stars of golden ribbons and soft clouds painted in Ellie's favorite purples. In the center, the tree she'd drawn, with stars in its branches, watched over the scene like a silent guardian. Natalie stood at the entrance clipboard in hand greeting visitors and volunteers. She wore a sage green dress and a smile that softened as she caught sight of Ethan, carrying Ellie across the courtyard. "You made it," she said, stepping forward. Ellie leaned into her father's shoulder, still conserving her energy, but smiling. "I wanted to see my cloud. It's right where you left it." Natalie said, her voice full of warmth. "Come on." They led her to the shaded bench beneath the mural. Ethan set her down carefully. She gazed up at the painted sky, then reached out and touched the golden ribbon that wound across the wall. "It looks like it's glowing," she whispered. "It is," Natalie said, kneeling beside her. "That's the light people carry with them. Sometimes it just needs a place to shine." Ethan stood back watching them. For a moment, he didn't feel like a man who had almost lost everything. He felt like a man who had come home not to a place, but to a purpose. Later that afternoon, a ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a small crowd. The mayor spoke, donors gave thanks, and the crowd clapped politely. But it was when Natalie took the stage that the air truly shifted. She spoke not with polish, but with honesty. "This center isn't just made of wood and concrete. It's made of stories," she said. "Stories of single fathers who sacrificed everything for their children. Of children who dreamed of stars and clouds. Of artists who painted skies not with perfection, but with love." Her voice cracked just barely. "This place exists because of kindness. Because someone once decided not to leave when it was easier to walk away." Her eyes found Ethan's in the crowd. Because someone stayed. After the applause, the center's doors opened wide. Visitors streamed in, marveling at the open concept playrooms, the reading nooks nestled beneath tree-like beams, the gentle lighting and calming colors throughout the clinic wing. Ellie held tightly to Ethan's hand as they entered the wing marked the Sky Room, a quiet space meant for children in recovery. In the ceiling above, a circular skylight framed the sky, and on cloudy days a projection system filled the ceiling with soft stars. Ellie looked up and gasped. "It's my sky." "It is," Ethan said, "and it always will be." She turned to him, eyes wide. "Can other kids see it too?" He nodded. "Every single one." And for the first time since the surgery, Ellie began to cry. Quiet tears, not of fear or pain, but of something deeper, something like joy. Natalie came beside her and gently wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "You gave this to them," she said, "just by dreaming it." That evening, when the crowds thinned and twilight began to pull a curtain of soft gray over the district, Ethan and Natalie stood together outside the center. They didn't speak at first, just stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the windows glow from within, a beacon of warmth in the heart of a neighborhood once forgotten. "She wants to come here every week now," Ethan said, smiling. "She'll always have a place," Natalie replied. Then she turned to him, her voice quiet. "And so will you." He met her eyes and something passed between them, not urgent, not rushed. A promise. He took her hand in his. "Let's build it," he said. Build what she asked, already knowing the answer. A life, he replied, one with light and color and rooms that never feel empty. She nodded, her hand closing around his. "Let's start with this moment," she said, and together they walked home under the soft glow of stars. The laughter came before the door even opened. Inside the design studio at Harbor Haven, a group of teenagers huddled around a work table, sketching furiously on large rolls of tracing paper. Some lines were sharp and architectural, others wild and dreamlike, tree houses with elevators, community fountains shaped like musical notes, playgrounds that looked like giant book pages. At the center of it all stood Ethan, sleeves rolled up, a pencil behind one ear, nodding thoughtfully as he studied a particularly ambitious plan for a garden shaped like a butterfly. Okay, Diego, he said, smiling. Tell me how someone in a wheelchair gets to the center of this. The boy grinned sheepishly. Um, maybe a ramp. Ethan raised an eyebrow. How steep? Diego paused. Not too steep. The group laughed. Ethan smiled too. But then he leaned forward, tapping the sketch with a fingertip. Try again. Dream big, but dream real. If it doesn't welcome everyone, it's not good design. The room quieted, but not in disappointment and thought. Then heads bent over drawings again, pencils moving. Natalie stood quietly in the doorway watching. Her arms were crossed over her chest, but there was no tension in her shoulders. Only something warm, admiring. She waited until Ethan noticed her and motioned him over with a small wave. He excused himself from the students and crossed the room. They're getting good, she said. They're getting bold, he corrected, grinning. I've got a 15-year-old trying to build a skate park shaped like a phoenix. I love that. Ethan nodded. So do I. They remind me of Ellie, unafraid to imagine. Natalie's expression shifted. Speaking of Ellie, his smile faded just slightly. What is it? She handed him a plain white envelope. Ethan opened it slowly and scanned the document inside. At first, his brow furrowed, trying to make sense of it. Then his eyes widened. You didn't? He began. I did, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a full scholarship application, a partnership with a nearby design institute, and a formal offer for Ethan to join their spring cohort as a part-time instructor and mentor for underserved students pursuing architecture. He looked up at her, stunned. Natalie, because you were never just a builder, she said. You're a teacher. You've been shaping lives since the day you walked back into this field. I've watched these kids believe in themselves because you believed in them first. He swallowed. I don't have a degree anymore. I've got gaps in my resume that look like sinkholes. I'm still just a man who designed a healing space that changed a city block, she interrupted. A father who turned pain into purpose, and someone who deserves to keep building something bigger. She placed a hand over his heart. And because your daughter will one day say, my dad helped build the place where dreams grow. Ethan's voice was thick when he finally said, I never thought I'd get a second chance like this. Natalie smiled. You earned it. That night back at home, Ethan sat with Ellie on the couch. She was curled up under a blanket, legs tucked beneath her, cradling a new set of watercolors Natalie had gifted her. I'm painting a dream room, she said as she dipped her brush in blue, with a ceiling that shows the stars and a swing instead of a chair. I love that, Ethan said. She glanced up at him. Do you have a dream room? He paused. I think I'm starting to, he said. It has people I love in it. It's filled with light. And there's a door that's always open. Ellie smiled, then returned to her painting. After a while, she said softly, You seem lighter now. He looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, when you laugh, it feels real again, like before Mommy got sick. His heart stuttered. I miss her, she continued, her brush still moving. But I'm happy you don't look so sad anymore. Ethan blinked hard and nodded. Me too, Bug. Then without prompting, she said, I like Natalie. He chuckled. Yeah, she listens, with her whole face. He laughed fully then, and something inside him settled. Days turned into weeks. The Harbor Haven Center became a beating heart in the community. Workshops filled up. The reading garden overflowed with families on weekends. Ethan's youth design program became a local highlight, drawing kids from across neighborhoods. He kept painting too. Little Things window alcoves in the clinic now had whimsical stencils of vines and clouds. Doors were painted sunshine yellow. Even the tool shed got a mural of smiling hammers and dancing paint cans, Ellie's idea. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the horizon and cast gold across the courtyard, Natalie stood beside him beneath the mural. The sky glowed purple and pink, just like Ellie's dream. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Ethan said, I never asked what you want next. She looked over. What I want, he nodded. Beyond this place, beyond everything we've built. She hesitated, then said, I want to grow something that lasts, not just spaces, but roots. A life with room for grief and joy. A family, maybe, if I'm lucky. He reached for her hand. Then let's keep building. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Start with this moment, He smiled. Always. 3 years later, the Harbor Haven Community Center stood not as a monument, but as a living, breathing part of the neighborhood. Children's chalk drawings spilled from its sidewalks. Wind chimes sang from its garden pergolas. And inside the mural on the east wall, once vibrant and new, had softened with time and sun, but its message remained clear. This was a place where light lived, and so did love. It was a Saturday morning in early spring. Warm sun filtered through the glass canopy in the courtyard, dappling the concrete with soft light. The sound of children laughing echoed through the open windows. Nearby, Ethan adjusted a stool at the youth sketch table, pausing to help a young girl erase a smudge from her watercolor skyline. "You don't have to start over," he said gently. "Sometimes the messiest strokes become the most interesting ones." She looked up and beamed. "Like yours," he grinned. "Exactly like mine." From across the courtyard, Natalie watched the exchange with a soft smile. She wore a breezy linen blouse and had a pen tucked behind her ear, a clipboard full of program schedules balanced against her hip. Years had passed, but her presence remained the same, strong, steady, and impossibly grounded. Ethan caught her eye, and they exchanged a glance that said more than words could. This was home now. Inside the multi-purpose room, Ellie stood nervously in front of a folding easel, gripping the edges of a sheet of thick sketch paper. At 13, she had grown tall and willowy, with her mother's quiet strength and her father's eyes. She wore a hoodie splattered in paint and a nervous smile that made her look both younger and older than her age. Beside her was a covered canvas, her surprise for the anniversary celebration. The entire staff had been sworn to secrecy. Natalie peeked in from the hallway and winked. "They're ready when you are, sweetheart." Ellie took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay." When the crowd gathered, a hush settled over the space. Friends, neighbors, former patients, volunteers, all faces that had touched and been touched by this place. Ethan stood off to the side, trying to appear casual, but his hands were clasped too tightly in front of him. Ellie stepped up to the mic. Her voice was small but steady. "I was 5 when I first came here," she began. "Well, sort of. It wasn't here yet. It was still broken back then. Just bricks and weeds and scary things I didn't understand." Some gentle laughter rumbled through the room. "My dad brought me to the site before there were walls. He told me we were going to build something where people didn't feel afraid anymore. And then he painted a sky just for me." She paused, glancing toward him. "I didn't know then that the sky was really for everyone, for anyone who ever felt small or sick or alone. He built a place where people could breathe again." Ethan's eyes stung, and he ducked his head, and Ellie continued turning toward her. Now she planted the seeds that made it grow. "She didn't just build this center. She gave me my first paints. She told me my ideas mattered." A murmur of affection spread through the room. Ellie smiled. "So this year I wanted to give something back." She stepped beside the covered easel, then gently pulled the cloth away. Gasps filled the room. The painting was breathtaking. A wide-open courtyard under a swirling, dreamlike sky, filled with clouds and golden ribbons, just like the mural. In the center stood 3 figures, a little girl with a telescope pointed upward, a man sketching at a bench, and a woman watering a tree that bloomed with stars. The faces were abstract but unmistakably them. At the top, in handwritten letters, it read, "Home is the place that taught me how to fly." No one spoke for a long moment. Then Ethan stepped forward slowly, reverently. He crouched beside Ellie and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She held him back fiercely, burying her face into his neck. "I'm proud of you, Bug," he whispered. "So proud." She smiled through her tears. "I wanted you to have a sky, too." Natalie joined them, placing one hand on Ellie's back and the other on Ethan's shoulder. For a moment they simply stood there, a family forged not by perfect circumstance, but by compassion, resilience, and 1,000 quiet choices to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. As the day wound down and golden light bathed the windows, Ethan and Natalie sat together on the bench beneath the old mural, now faded, but radiant in its own way. "She's going to be more than we ever dreamed," Natalie said, watching Ellie laugh with her friends near the garden. "She already is," Ethan replied. They sat in silence for a moment, fingers intertwined. "Do you ever think," Natalie asked quietly, "about the day we met? You walking out of that waiting room thinking it was over before it began?" Ethan chuckled. "And you stopping me with 3 words." She turned toward him. "Don't go." He looked at her, a smile playing on his lips. Best words I ever heard. She rested her head on his shoulder. We stayed. All of us. That's the miracle. He nodded. And for once there was no urgency to build no drawing, to perfect no storm to weather. There was only this a man who had learned to hope again. A woman who had dared to love after loss. A girl who had survived and begun to soar. And a place painted in sky and stitched in kindness that would outlive them all. Not a structure, a sanctuary, a home. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We're always amazed by how far these stories reach. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring, soul-stirring tales just like this one. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that matter. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate the power of a single act of love.